Michelle.
Daniel,
OG
OG Rose, and today we're going to talk about the release of
Under the Wing!
Woo! 11/11.
Yes, our short story collection. We're so thrilled and excited for it to be coming out this upcoming week. So do look out for that.
Yeah. So this is coming out on Friday, and that will be released on Monday. That'll come out on the 11th, and we just thought we'd talk about why fiction, philosophy, why literature matters, and we also started doing creative writing and things.
Yeah. I mean, we started as OG Rose because of fiction writing.
Yep.
Many years ago, and so it's definitely a big part of like our collaborative work together, and sort of like how I mean, I think that there's always been philosophy in the atmosphere and theology in the atmosphere and in the background. But it's in terms of the actual writing, it really started out as fiction with some. I mean, we both obviously you write essays for college or for classes, and you also write essays suddenly because you're like, oh, I want to write this, or maybe I want to write about an author or a poet or something like that. So, I think it's exciting. It's exciting because again, it's like there's something that's really core to OG Rose about the fiction work, and so it's really the fact that we get to share it with everybody is great. And I think too, fiction has a really unique power. It has a really unique ability to do something that in some ways philosophy can't. Like philosophy writing can do a lot of wonderful things too. I think that they both do things that the other can't, but together there's a really great kind of reciprocity between the two that brings out really, I think, truly the best of like what both of them are about. Because just really quick, philosophy is about like why do philosophy? Why think things? Why ask questions? I mean, those things are all about actually living. How to live your life, how to be human, right? How to live better. And then fiction gets into like what people do, this sort of thing of how does that actually look in people's lived experiences and their particularity and their narratives. And so, it's to me very, very much like a mutually beneficial relationship between the two.
Oh yeah. Well, there's a way in which philosophy that cannot be brought into literature one should question, because there's a way in which if this philosophy is actually meaningful and can manifest in people's lives and matter, then you ought to be able to tell a story about it.
Yeah.
In the same way that like in mathematics you need to have a proof, or if you want to do engineering of a building, there's some degree of mathematics you'd want to show. There's a similar relationship between literature and philosophy, where literature is a kind of proof in a way that the philosophy actually has bearings on how people live.
Yeah.
And I think when literature gets separated from philosophy, then it loses the possibility of what Luber and Alex will call the theme. It loses the ability to be about something more than what's going on. When you're reading Dostoevsky and Alyosha and Dmitri and their operations, there's the zeitgeist of the age in conflict. It is not merely a story about Alyosha and Ivan and Dmitri. There's a whole lot more going on. Yeah. When there's a bull in Greenleaf of Flannery O'Connor, when there's when there's Emily and short stories of William Faulkner, there's more than that, right? Always a double action is occurring, like not merely because everything is a symbol, but because it is pointing to something with stakes, or it's pointing to a kind of condition of the human being that ultimately we as human beings work really hard to avoid, and yet ultimately and eventually, if we're living with stakes and we're trying to be fully human, we encounter the shortcomings of reality. We encounter the ironies and the contradiction. And so good literature is not merely symbols, but it is participating in that unfolding, to use a Hegelian term. It is pointing to some sort of way of things that literature is to bring into focus. Like there's a weird thing in which literature isn't like your daily life. Like if you literally just told a story of your daily life, you might be like, why is this a book? There was a writer once who tried to record literally every detail of a single day, and the book became like 10,000 pages or something, something like that. But there's a way in which a story is not merely a recounting of a daily life, but a story is bringing into focus something that is participated in by daily life, that consists of the material of daily life, but it is bringing it into focus so that you can see it. And the thing that usually human beings need to see are philosophical, because those are the difficult things to see. Like things you can see. There are many things you see that you don't need literature or the humanities to bring into focus because you already see them. But there are things you do need to see that are more invisible, quote unquote, more difficult to see. And those tend to be metaphysical. Those tend to be philosophical stakes. Those tend to be situations, as Leibniz would say, that are not easy to see. And literature tends to be at its best when it brings those things into focus. And what has happened, and then I'll give it to you, is that literature without philosophy doesn't feel like it's bringing anything into focus that is hard to see. It doesn't feel like it's doing that Proustian kindling of new eyes. Yeah. It might be fun, it might be entertaining, but it doesn't help. Often literature without philosophy can feel like it doesn't help you see. Well, funny enough, philosophy that can't be brought into literature also feels like it doesn't help you see. In fact, it might just confuse you. You're like, why is this relevant, right?
Right.
There's a way in which there's not a focusing that can occur. And I think both of them kind of inform each other in having this ability to see things that you're always looking at, but struggling to see, as Cossetti puts at the end of Waiting for the Barbarians, which is a lovely conclusion to that novel.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, that was good. And yeah, that's true. I think, too, the idea of situations is important, right? Like there are these situations that fiction allows you to really have to look at, and we tend to sort of not look at those things in our own lives. And also, I mean, I think philosophy does do a good job, or it tries to do a good job of forcing you to look at things, right, that you would maybe rather not or feel uncomfortable, because it's a dismantling. It can be or
don't know how to see. There are many things in philosophy you simply don't know how to look at.
For example?
Well, like tragedy, like trade-offs of competing good. What is the right way to look at or see, say, the fact that freedom and justice come in conflict, freedom and security come in conflict?
Yeah.
Or the fact that, a pluralistic age consists of, as I would put it, internally consistent systems and ideologies that have to learn to exist with one another. It is hard to see that our condition is one where we have to mediate difference and live with difference, as opposed to think we need to overcome difference or avoid anxiety. Like, it is hard to see the situation we are in clearly to know what we need to live. We tend to missee it according to our emotional reactions.
Mm-hmm. Or we think we are seeing it.
Yes.
Like, we think we've understand it.
Yeah, that's
or whatever,
the problem. That's right.
Right. So it's like it's being seen, but it's really not being seen for what it really is. Yeah. I get that. Okay, that's true. Yeah, I think too that so in that way, I think philosophy does try to, like, good philosophy is going to do the same kind of Proustian cultivation of eyes for sure too. Yep. Kind of like with our essay on eyes, on kind of that being like those are the way what we think about are essentially lenses.
Ideas are practically eyes.
Exactly. Yep. Excuse me. And I think too, like with fiction, something about it that maybe is unique to the way philosophical writing goes is that it sort of works more on the situational level, right? Where it's a little bit more like, oh, these are humans, whereas with philosophy it might be ideas that are related to humanity or being human or being or something like this, but it's not always as clear. I think good philosophy will make it clear how this is like relational, or how the philosophy relates to human life, to our daily experiences even. But fiction is a little bit more like straightforward about it being situations and humans and things that people can suddenly feel like, wow, I resonate with this so much, even though this character is so different from me, but I resonate with them, with their situation so much. And it's powerful in that way, because what it ultimately does is it's upfront about the implicit is all of that philosophy. Yes. And that just reveals so much of what life is actually like, where those implicit things, the implicit philosophical things are there, but we don't always realize it. I mean, that's why I think ultimately philosophy is important, because it's at play anyway, whether you think it is or isn't, or think it's not. It is at play, because just like thinking about philosophy as air, right? Or Ayn Rand will say secondhand smoke, right? This idea of that. Yeah. So anyway, I think though it's something neat and important, I think, for fiction to be able to have this sort of like substantiation in the, like, it's steeped in philosophy or something. Like steeped, I don't mean that steeped can kind of be a strong word, but I mean it more subtle, like how tea has a sort of steeping. It's not like always overt, but it's there, right? Where it, because I think that's important with fiction, because otherwise, don't get me wrong, everybody can kind of resonate with a good like story with sort of a moral, but a lot of times it can become reduced to a, this is good, this is bad. Like, it doesn't always include the nuance. And I think fiction that includes the philosophical does make it much more like literary in many ways. And also for that reason makes it more, able to hold the bothness, the difficulty, but also the beauty of that as well. Of life, that life contains.
Absolutely. Much of the human being comes down to the question of a situation in which a choice must be made where there is no clear right answer, the absolute choice.
And that's so difficult, because we're like,
yes, the reason why
I just always think like there's,
I think literature for our current historic moment must have the role of showing situations where an absolute choice must be made. Whether it be Eve, rather it be the mother in Help, rather it be Esperanza, these are different characters from the collection. A choice has to be made. And one of the issues is, perhaps one could almost do an analysis of the history of literature in terms of the role of the choice in the story. Like, what is the role of choice in the story? What is the quality of choice? And I think there's a changing quality. Often there is the choice to not give in to a temptation. There's a choice to face fear. There's a choice to fight Sauron. There's a choice to do something. And I think human history often is really marked by the change of the quality of the choice, of the character of choice at a historic moment. I think the kind of choice the human has to make says a lot about the historic moment. And I think literature as a history of choice is well, honestly, it's one of the reasons why. I mean, Gadamer kind of argued the only way to really learn history is through the arts, because otherwise you don't get at the horizon of experience that the historic moment was going through. You end up with facts. But this is why someone like Hayden White, who the great thinker of his historical studies, and then also, of course, Selby Foote or people like that, they really argued that history needed to own the fact it was a literary genre and get really good at being literary. Shelby Foote's whole Civil War thing is trying basically to be a kind of novel. Because you say, well, then it's propaganda. You say, no. You don't really learn history until you feel history, until it becomes an emotional experience. And otherwise, you just end up with a list of facts. And here's the problem. And Hayden White emphasized this as well. When you present history overly factual, one, you act as if facts are, objective and impartial, and that's a problem. But two, it creates the impression that people have learned from history, and that they won't repeat history, and that they'll be ready for the mistakes of history. And no, you will not, until you learn how the people felt in those moments. Until you learn, until you feel history, you won't learn, you won't be prepared. It's hard enough to be prepared even if you do feel it, but if you don't feel it, overconfidence is extremely likely. Well, one of the things that literature can do is prepare you for the quality of choice and the kind of choice that has to be made. And I think we're at an age where the absolute choice, which is something we talk about a lot at the Net and O.G. Rose, basically what will decide the fate of humanity? Rather will be replaced by AI, rather humanity will extend itself, whether will answer the calls of Ivan Illich or fail to rise to the challenge of Nick Land, is our ability to make an absolute choice. A choice that is its own grounding, that faces the tragedies and trade-offs of reality and takes a stand and chooses something and then sticks by it. And that is what I think literature needs to show and to prepare you for, and that's what Under the Wing is really meant to kind of focus on, is this quality of choice. And I definitely think literature can be seen in terms of choice and as a quality of it. And I basically, a reason, again, why I think philosophy and literature are so strongly tied is because without philosophy, you can't think up a situation in which an absolute choice is possible and believable. Like that it's truly an absolute choice. Like you really have to show the internal consistency of two competing ideologies in view of the world and then somehow get a character between them. You know, and because that's the human experience, is finding yourself in between spaces and having to make a choice in those between spaces, which you don't have a clear standard of what the choice should be because that can only be found within one of the two signs. You have to be in one of the signs to have the metric, and you're between them. So what do you do? That's the only place the human can be. And I think great literary character, I think it is critical that literature today works to show characters in that situation, because that's what the human needs to have models of and to experience and to feel. Because if they do not feel that, they won't be prepared for that, and then they won't be able to make the choice that requires of them, and then the human will be replaced versus extended.
Yeah, no, that was all really good, Daniel. Yeah, I'm on the, just really quick on the point of feeling history and how that relates to fiction and really Under the Wing, like this work is, I was thinking about how history too, when we learn it like facts, like it's some subject just like that, then we sort of assume, like we see it from kind of like the all-knowing eye, like we know everything that happened, but a lot of times experientially people didn't know what was going on, really. They didn't know the fullness or the whole picture or whatever. They knew parts.
They were just making choices.
Yeah, exactly. They were making those choices from only knowing partially.
Yes.
And I think that's important, and also how fiction often is showing demonstrations of people who have this kind of partiality, like a partial. Partiality is not the right word. It's the partial knowledge, right?
Yes.
It's a partial knowledge, or it really makes me think of you and Thomas's talk on partial object.
Yeah.
But there's something about this fact that they don't always know. They certainly don't, or they believe that they know, and yet it shows a kind of it's not able to. It's only knowing in part, not in full. And I think that creates certain dynamics of how those choices are felt, and it's important. But yeah, I love what you said on choice, and I think that's absolutely true. And I think it's something, we hope to. I mean, I think that's what is cultivated. The hope is that it can be felt to be cultivated and experienced through the stories, for sure.
Well, partial knowledge is precisely what literature should be showing characters, living with, coming to terms with, and making choice in light of. Yeah. But partial knowledge is also why beauty is possible. It is why tragedy is possible. It is all mixed together, and precisely this condition that brings this to the forefront, which again, I think you require philosophy to be able to think. And you can't, to use that general line that Esperanza kind of alludes to on show don't tell constantly. Like you're always told show don't tell. Well, without philosophy, you don't have a thing to resist telling to show. Like you need philosophy to figure out what you're going to show instead of telling. Like showing instead of telling is only a virtue if you really, really, really want to tell something, and it's really, really, really hard to show it. Like very often that idea of show don't tell, I think, is used to justify literature not doing philosophy. But the problem is that line is only useful if it's a negation, not an absence. Meaning, no, there's a lot to tell, but I'm not allowed to. Because actually the power comes from the showing of that which is not told but there. And philosophy, I think, is basically the only way to show and not tell, and it not be a cheap show. Like to be a costly and meaningful showing, you need something that you're not telling. Yeah. And yet you show, which of course is kind of impossible, right? And yet isn't that not what humans do every single day? Yeah. We are constantly showing something that is our subjectivity that we can't ever really tell. We can point to it, we can voice words, but we actually can't tell fully who we are. All we can do is show it and use words and language that point at it, and there's a certain partiality to it. And yet we live on. Yeah. We carry on, we figure out how to work. Well, if we don't figure out how to do it, then we're not fully human. And I think without philosophy, literature really can't do that. because there isn't a subjectivity, that there isn't something that is in the background of the showing. And anyone listening to this may guess that it's really hard to actually kind of talk about a short story collection, because you don't want to give the stories away, so you want to mention characters and some of the themes, but it's like, we could talk about what the story's about, but then it's ruined. So that's always kind of fun. So obviously different characters like Esperanza.
Yeah.
It's a story, it takes place in Havana. It will be interested in the question of there's a ballerina dancer named Esperanza. There's Eve in her school, and it is funny. It's difficult to talk about stories in it without giving things away.
It sure is, but it's interesting because these stories are like they're definitely like the characters, because they all have really kind of a main character or main set of people, and they're definitely like people to us. I think it's quite interesting because they feel like actual living beings who who you end up learning about. Learning
but I think
through,
I think philosophy does that as well. I think it's very difficult to get characters that feel like they live beyond the work without philosophy, because there's not a, dare I say, cosmic situation that they are caught in just like you.
Right, exactly. No, for sure. And I think too, there's something I was going to say on oh golly,
showing, not telling.
Yeah, that's it. Thanks, Dan. It's also kind of funny because you say show don't tell. You hear that in English class or whatever, writing class, and then you still use words.
Yeah, you use
It's not
words.
like you go to some pictogram or something like that. And so it's, the funny thing is it's kind of like an ironic situation to be in that. And I think too, there's something though that is still true about that statement. But I do think that it's kind of become, oh no, we don't want to do mouthpiece characters, so we're never going to do philosophy in literature like in fiction. I think it's unfortunately been used for that reason, where it's almost like, okay, but we all have human thoughts, and we all have human situations, and we all have this inner outer struggle. And so for me, I think you have to kind of push past the fear of that to be able to, but still do it in an artful way, where there is where you are trying to show, not tell, right? But you're still telling a story, and you're still, and the thing is, you're still, there's a lot that goes on inside of one's head that does bring about a type of, like you're saying, it helps you to better connect to what is the bigger thing happening here, like that more cosmic struggle of the human, and yeah.
Well, so there's a few things. I mean, just from a technical standpoint, if a character is talking about an idea, and this was, I think it was like the Glicksberg writing book, it's like, make sure the character never believes it. Make sure any idea a character discusses is one they are in conflict with. There's a difference between having ideas in a story that characters are representing and giving voice to versus fighting with. Like, ideas in a story should be a kind of battle with the gods, if you will. Like, the ideas are precisely not things that the characters are trying. Like, the problem is, there are stories where the characters are trying to, quote-unquote, educate the reader of philosophical ideas. And that's what the advice is trying to fight. Don't have a character where a writer's like, I have philosophical ideas and I want to get them out to the people. Therefore, I'm going to have a character basically evangelize these ideas to people, right? But that can be dangerous, of course. But think instead of, what is an idea that a character finds themselves confronted by, that then demands something of them as a human being, as a person.
As a having to respond.
And actually, those kind of stakes, those deep ontological stakes, which I think basically great literature is always ontological stakes, is impossible without ideas. So you take your, the fear of ideas and stories leading to mouthpieces and pamphlets and moralizing results in literature that has no ontological stakes. And so people don't care. And they go watch movies, of course, because why would you do anything else?
Yeah, right? Exactly. Yeah, no, for sure, 100%. And I think, too, your point on, we show what telling can kind of only ever point to, you're saying that. Well, I think there's also something really fascinating about how we do this thing as humans as well, where we tell quite directly and end up showing the opposite. And we don't realize it. Or somehow our telling contradicts our showing
Yes.
Even though we're like really trying for those things to line up.
Yes.
And it's so difficult, it seems, for us as humans to be able to have those things actually line up.
Yes, there should always, like, for example, if a character says, I believe X, then in the next line, show them doing something that suggests they don't really believe X. That is the human condition. And humans do speak ideas. Humans do fight for ideas. They do voice for ideas. But the key is they tend to do it in a manner that is ironic or contradictory or incomplete or
inconsistent.
Or inconsistency, or when they actually see the implementation of the things they believed in, they're horrified by what arises, or they're shocked by where their idea leads them. That is the human condition. It is inseparable from ideas.
Right. And it's almost like makes me think that the telling, it kind of gets to a place of where you don't know, like the showing then creates, possibly questions or maybe even conflict or things like that then you're like, I don't know what to say. Like, yes. The telling could never be sufficient enough to kind of make, the telling that seems to be the thing that is the most confident ends up being the thing that is like most lacking, when it comes to having to try to explain any of that sort of like potential incongruency or something like that.
Well, absolutely. And I mean, as just, I think, a good heuristic is if you're a writer and you want to bring ideas into your work, try to make them the ideas you strongly disagree with and make the story about how those ideas work. And that will naturally, you have to create conflicts between, say, you and what the character believes, but not in a manner that is cheap, because then that honestly requires empathy out of you, which will make you a critical thinker. And then two, it's kind of true to life. Like we live our lives confronting and having to figure out how to learn to live with difference. And one should be creating difference between themselves and the paper. And because if they themselves cannot learn how to be with difference and to clearly see the human situation, then they're not going to be able to write about it. So there are different ways to think about this. And look, Dostoevsky, Dostoevsky is just a kind of a at-hand example. You could argue he makes the strongest argument against God's existence in history with the Grand Inquisitor section. And this is a Christian man, right? Mm-hmm. And yet his characters, he's so incredibly steelmans. Everyone he strongly disagrees with personally, and you could argue the weakest characters are the ones he believes that he thinks like, right? Mm-hmm. But it's not cheap. Like, it's really, really powerful that way. And so, now, I think the real challenge for our moment today, though, is figuring how to bring Chekhov, Tolstoy, Gogol, and Dostoevsky together, like the Russians, all together. Because there is a certain power in the Anna Karenina cutting the hay showing that we see in Tolstoy, that if brought together with Dostoevsky's ontological stakes is, I think, what this moment needs. And I think that gets into where you think, like, just to keep using that phrase, show don't tell, well, you realize that's not really clear advice, and it's not really helpful. But also, once you understand that showing is freaking hard, like truly showing is insanely difficult. Like, again, it's the great, legendary, incredible Robert Olson Butler from Where Dreams Come, which was one of the great smacks to my face. I'll never forget that book, where he's like, you really think you're showing, do you? That's an abstraction. So if I say to you, there's a hay bale on the hill, am I showing you something? Robert Olson Butler would be like, that's a complete abstraction. There is no such thing as hay bale. There is golden wheat wrapped in a circle sitting upon dewy grass while the sun is rising lightly to the east. That showing is what Robert Olson Butler is like. It's like you really don't understand as a human being how rarely you ever show or accurately describe anything. Mm-hmm. And you're like, oh my gosh, he's right. And that's the other issue, is one of the reasons I think literature has suffered is not only has it removed ideas, but it actually doesn't even show. Like, it actually doesn't show. It's just abstraction. Like, and as a result, you don't see what's going on. You don't have, then you don't have possibilities of beauty or glimmers or different things. But to combine, like, if you take the showing of a Tolstoy, the deep, deep, deep Robert Olson method, and you think it together with stakes, I think there are possibilities in literature that are not possible in any other medium. Certainly the first-person perspective, the inner voice, vocalization, perspectives, uses of language, there are ways stories can be told in literature that can't be in any other medium, but too often than not, literature is written as if it was a movie, as if it was going to be on a screen or hoping to be a screenplay. And as a result, it doesn't tap into, I think, the potential that is there in literature, which I think uniquely positions it to help humans experience the ontological stakes of our situation and the absolute choice and all of these different things. And I think that's an opportunity for that. And philosophy can help unlock that.
Yeah. Yeah, no, for sure. Absolutely. Yeah, no, I think that's absolutely right. And I think just really quick again about, showing and telling. And it's funny because it's almost like, let me tell you that you have to show, don't tell, right? So that's kind of the funny thing about it. And I think there is something really, really interesting on what you said on the Russians too. Two things. One, this idea of actually thinking through ideas you don't agree with, or it makes me think of our good friend who wrote an incredible podcast musical.
Oh yeah,
in Strange Woods, because I remember Jeff, like when he visited us, being talking about fear of being in the woods, and he literally faced that fear, or he was trying to grapple with his own fear to write this musical podcast, and I thought that's like, I still think about that frequently. Just about how he did that, and how it takes a kind of you really have to step out and look at it, and it's not easy to do that, especially when it's fears which can become so kind of almost like you can get kind of paranoid about them. And so that's another way, I think, to create stakes and the tensions of difference is actually by facing fears, to your own fears, and also admitting and acknowledging and incorporating how fear is such a big element of the human condition. But when you do that, there's a lot that can come forth from that that's very powerful. And the other thing, last thing, on the Russians and Chekhov too, I was thinking about the combination of, like you're saying, the Tolstoy, the showing Dostoevsky with the ontological, the in a sense is kind of a telling of the ontological, and then there's like it makes me think of all of the wonderful dialogue of Chekhov, and I think that's another thing that to be able to bring that together can really be quite the combination. And I do believe that that's something that our moment is in need of, and I think can greatly benefit from as well.
Well, because it can help bring into the focus the things we're looking at but we don't quite see. But since we sense we're seeing something, or we sense something is going on but we can't quite see it or get a sense of it, because it has to be orbited, it can't be directly stated like a syllogism. It's a situation, it's a higher dimensionality, it's Leibniz, not algebraic. It's meta-geometrical. Well, we need literature and story to help us see it. And if it doesn't, we'll just continue to be anxious, angry, and, go crazy, right? You kind of go crazy when you sense there's something you need to get but can't get it. And this is like art and literature, I think, can help people kind of see the situation so that they can then stop feeling crazy, because I have a sense of what's going on. I have a sense that the human is being brought to places of absolute choice. I see that ultimately human notions of right and wrong create spaces that those ideas can't actually carry you through. You have to make a choice between them. Okay, this is the human condition. This is what's going on.
Right.
All right, now I get it. It's not just me, it's reality. And that I think that's something that art can help us with. Yeah,
100%. Well, guys, we're so excited.
No, we're very excited. But there's 11 short stories.
Yes.
And we'll have Kindle and
Kindle and a paperback version.
paperback will be available.
Yes, on our Amazon page.
Yep.
Sure.
And we at all purchases, reviews, thoughts, we'd feedback. We'd love to hear what people thought.
Yes.
We I guess established the name OG Rose in 2011, Upperman Garner Rose. And I do remember sitting at Unoya in the back working on these stories, or
Oh yes.
rather, the ornithologist who studied the stars, or Esperanza, or the Reason, or different things. This collection will consist of the stories Heroes, The White Man, Esperanza, Olive Leaves. It will consist of Help. It will consist of Ludwig. Show, Sleeping with Humanity, Hoop, Inside, and Under the Wing, which is the same name as the collection.
Yes.
Again, there's 11 stories, and we are thrilled to be putting it in the world.
Yes.
So thank you so much for your time. For more
Yes, thank you.
by OG Rose, please visit Twitter, Anchor, Instagram, Amazon, YouTube, so on and so forth. And thank you so much for your time.
Yep. Thank you.